We're going to discuss interval notation, and this is coming from section 1.1. All right, so first of all, let's establish what interval notation is. Basically, it's just a way of showing the interval on the number line that is part of a solution set. So we're going to use brackets if you saw a less than or equal to or a greater than or equal to on the number line. And we're going to use parentheses if there's a less than or a greater than. So think back to when you were in, I would say, middle school, high school. You used a closed circle versus an open circle when you were working on the number line. So we're just taking it up a notch. And we're going to say that the closed circle is the equivalent of brackets, and the open circle is the equivalent of parentheses. So let's take a look at this a little bit further. So I want you to imagine interval notation acting like a graph in miniature. So you can see down here a brief summary of what the interval notation looks like for the equivalent inequality. So if I had that x was between a and b, and it was a less than or equal to, that would be the equivalent of bracket a, comma, b, close bracket. And the reason for that is I want you to think about what that looks like on the number line. So let's suppose that a is 2 and b is 3. So we have that x is between 2 and 3 and could include either 2 or 3. So if I had my number line, here's 2, here's 3, then I'm going to use a bracket, and I'm going to put another bracket on 3, and I'm going to shade in between. And again, think back to what I said about those closed circles. So now, if we were going to write that in interval notation, it's just bracket 2, comma 3. It's almost like I've lifted this off of the number line and put it there without having to have the number line there. Okay, so again, imagine that number line were there. Okay, and it's just like the number line is missing. So if I had that x was between a and b, but b wasn't included, then the only difference was b would have a parentheses on it. It would almost act like an open circle. Likewise, if I had the next one here where a wasn't included, a would have the parentheses. And if we just have a less than, no equal to signs attached, then you can see that there's parentheses around each. So let's take a quick look at that, and then we'll do some more examples. Let's suppose you're given the inequality statement that you see here, and you're asked to graph it. So we're going to put our number line in. Let's suppose 0's here, so that puts 3 about here and 5 right about there, give or take a little bit. So since there's no equal to, it's just a less than, we're going to use parentheses. So we're going to start at 3. We can go all the way up to 5. And x has to be between those 2 points. Use parentheses, not brackets, because it's a less than and not a less than or equal to. So now, if you can see what we've got there in red, I'm going to do away with the number line, and I'm just going to simply write it now in interval notation. So I've got parentheses on my 3 and a parentheses on my 5. And that's how I would write that in interval notation. That way I don't have to put the whole number line on there, and it saves us some space. So the examples that we just looked at involved the unknown x being between two numbers. But what if x isn't between two numbers? Let's suppose, like I have here, x is just greater than or equal to 2. Well, let's think about what that looks like on our number line first. So I'm going to put my number line in. Let's put 0 here. That makes 2 right about there. Since it's a greater than or equal to, we're going to put a bracket. And I always face the bracket in the direction I'm going to go in. So I'm facing it towards the right because I'm going to shade to the right because it's a greater than or equal to. So there's how I would graph interval notation. Now imagine lifting what I've got there in red off of that number line. So I have a bracket on 2, but where does it go to? Well, it goes on forever. I don't see a number that it ends at, so we're going to put infinity. since we can never reach infinity, I have to put a parenthesis next to the infinity because I can never actually touch that number. So now let's look at the next one. X is less than or equal to negative 5. So again, let's look at it on the number line to have it make a little bit more sense. So here's my 0. That puts negative 5 about here. It's a less than, so I'm going to be going to the left, which means my bracket has to face that direction, and we will shade to the left. Now imagine lifting that red off of the number line. So just like when you read a book, you read from left to right. So up here on this example, we read from left to right. We started at the 2 and we went towards infinity. Here I'm going to do the same thing. I've got to read from left to right. So what I'm starting at there is infinity, because that's what's down on this side of things. To indicate that the infinity is towards the negative numbers or towards the left of the graph, we're going to say parentheses negative infinity, comma, and then that bracket is sitting on the negative 5. So if it's a less than, the negative infinity leads. If it's a greater than, the positive infinity comes behind. And again, this is a graph in miniature. So if you have to, graph it like we've done first, and that should help you visualize what the interval notation needs to look like. I want to do a few examples with you just like I would if we were sitting in class together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an interval. Let's suppose the interval we're given looks like this. Parentheses negative 8, comma, negative 1 with another parentheses. And let's suppose the directions say to graph that. So let's draw our number line. I'm going to have negative 8 all the way down here, negative 7, negative 6, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1 right there. And then I am told what to do on that graph based on the symbols that I see there. So I've got a parentheses on negative 8, and I've got a parentheses on negative 1. And since there's 2 numbers in that interval, that indicates to me to shade in between the 2 numbers. Let's suppose that rather than having both be parentheses or both brackets, that you've got one of each. And the directions again say to graph it on a number line. So I'm going to go ahead and put my number line in. If there's 0, that puts negative 2 right about there, and 3 just a little bit further from 0 on the other side. So again, look at the symbols that you've been given in interval notation. This symbol tells me what to put on the negative 2. This symbol tells me what to put on the 3, and we're going to shade in between. Finally, a lot of the work that you're going to do in this class and in any work that you do online is going to have you solve an inequality, and then you're going to be expected to write that inequality in interval notation. So let's practice that here. What we've got here is an inequality where x is between 2 numbers. So think about what that means if we were to graph it on a number line. I'm not expecting you to graph it each time, but it may help those of you that are still not quite getting it if I do it. So we've got 0 here, that puts negative 2 right about there, and 1 just a little bit to the right of 0. The fact that it's less than and not less than or equal to here tells us that it's got to be parentheses and not brackets. So I'm going to put a parentheses facing this direction on the negative 2 and a parentheses facing this direction on the 1, and we're going to shade in between. So now imagine lifting that up off of the number line, and I'll keep it in red for you. We had a parentheses at negative 2 and a parentheses on the 1. And you should see how what we have graphed on the number line pretty much mirrors what I have sitting over there in interval notation. So let's look at x is greater than 4. So again, let's put that number line in just to help. Here's 0, so we're going to put 4 up here. It's a greater than and not a greater than or equal to, so it has to be a parentheses. And I said to make sure you faced either the parentheses or the bracket in the direction that you're going to shade in. So since it's a greater than, we're going to loop it to the right, and then we're going to shade to the right. So now imagine picking that up off of the paper to write this in interval notation. So we have a parenthesis sitting at 4, and I never see it stop. So that goes on to infinity. And remember, parentheses around infinity. Okay, I'm going to circle that in blue because we can never actually touch infinity. Let's look at one more. Let's look at a less than. X is less than or equal to 6. So I'm going to put a little number line in here. Let's suppose that's 0, so there's my 6. Less than or equal to this time. So now I've got that equal to, so it has to be a bracket. And I'm going to face it the direction that we're going to shade. So I'm going to face it to the left, and I'm going to shade to the left. So if I just wanted interval notation for this, remember I read from left to right. So I'm going from negative infinity all the way up to 6 if I imagine picking that graph up off of the number line and placing it there without the number line. So I want you to practice just a little bit with interval notation. This is going to come up continually through the course. You're going to have to be able to convert between an inequality, a graph, and interval notation. Let's practice. Best of luck, and let me know if you have any questions.